we have been talking about the 49ers offensive line for a couple years now. It seems like we've been asking for the 49ers to draft Trent Williams' replacement for the last two drafts. It hasn't happened. They had opportunities this year to take multiple really good offensive linemen, and it just felt like they kept skipping on good players. And then we get in this situation where the 49ers will take a third round pick like they did this year in Pooney, which is fine. I think Pooney will be a good player. But we have to get uber excited about these undrafted free agent offensive linemen because that's what is available to us as 49er fans. So the question becomes, though, how important is the offensive line? And really, are we overblowing the situation? Well, I can say this. I think that football teams are built through the trenches. I think most people would agree with that. And the 49ers have avoided drafting in the trenches over the last couple years, which has been super disappointing. But when you have an all-time great, the best quarterback in the world come out and essentially tell your fan base in a roundabout way, he's not specifically talking about the 49ers, by the way. He's talking about offensive lines in general. But listen to what Tom Brady says about the offensive line and how important it is. This was today on the Herd with Colin Cowherd. This is the audio recording of Tom Brady talking about just how important the offensive line is for him and really even predicting future NFL champions. The 49ers not having a great offensive line. Can they truly ever win a Super Bowl? Well, time will tell, but Tom Brady, just on the surface, listening to him talk about an offensive line and really even the most important position in his mind outside the quarterback is the center position, which is interesting because you had Kyle Shanahan talk about how the center position was the heartbeat of his offense, yet they've rolled forward with a bunch of hodgepodge centers really since he's been here. Let's go ahead and listen to this together. You give me your thoughts.
Line is such an important part of every great football team. If you show me a great football team that doesn't have a great O-line, it probably doesn't exist very often. If you are, you're pretty lucky, and you better have incredible strengths everywhere else. And the reason why is that offensive line is really, they facilitate what happens on every run play. It's really up to them. Can they do incredible strengths everywhere?
I want to say this real quick. Listen to what he says here.
Else. And the reason why is that often, if you are, you're pretty lucky, and you better have incredible strengths everywhere else. And the reason why.
So he's basically talking about the 49ers here. He says if you don't have an elite, great offensive line, then you better be strong everywhere else. Well, if you look at the San Francisco 49ers, I mean, they're basically an all-star team outside of the offensive line. You've got arguably the best running back, arguably the best pass catchers when you add in players like George Kittle. You've got arguably the best defense in the league multiple years running. You've got arguably the best play caller in the league in Kyle Shanahan. You've got arguably a top 10 quarterback in Brock Purdy. They have an all-star team essentially, but it still hasn't been enough to get over the hump because they don't have that elite offensive line. Let's continue.
Why is that offensive line is really, they facilitate what happens on every run play. It's really up to them. Can they displace the line of scrimmage? Can they push the D-line back? And then in pass protection, when it's a must-throw situation, can we give our quarterback a chance to stand in there comfortably and make the reads? And when I've been playing against teams that have good O-lines, I can hear it in the meeting rooms. I sit there in the front row of every Bill Belichick meeting for over 20 years. When he was coaching our defense and we were playing a good offensive line, I knew that it was going to be a long, hard day for our defense.
Yeah.
Because in the run game, they were going to push us off the ball. They were going to create holes in space for them to run the ball well and possess it running it. And when it was a must-pass situation, that quarterback would have a chance to stand in there and make great reads. And on the flip side of that, when I heard that our defense could tee off on that other O-line and we can really hold up in the run game with not as many bodies as we needed to, I knew we were going to get a chance to force the quarterback into mistakes, and we were going to have the ball a lot in terms of possession because they were going to be punting the football a lot. So
if you think about the way that those Patriots teams were built when they won championships, they had great offensive lines. And sometimes the weapons, the receiving weapons weren't as on par. Once they finally got a great receiving core, they went undefeated, but they ultimately didn't win the Super Bowl. And that was because the Giants' defensive line was able to cause havoc for the New England Patriots. So he knows exactly what he's talking about. We're going to continue this. Listen to what he says about the center position.
The choice is always made with, I was fortunate. I had a lot of great offensive lines in my career. I played with guys. I had a lot of confidence in them up front. Certainly the center position is extremely important. It's such a unique relationship the center and the quarterback have. I loved all those guys I played with. They were up front. They were getting everyone coordinated. And when I felt like they had things under control up front, it gave me a lot of confidence to stand back in the pockets. Choosing a good team with a good O-line is paramount to the success of a quarterback. You're not going to have a good season if your offensive line can't hold up in protection. And I know when I was at Tampa, when we beat them in the Super Bowl, the Chiefs, that is, they really struggled up front. They had a lot of injuries that year. Andy Reid and Brett Beach decided to come back, revamp that O-line, and they played tremendous football since. They really invested in their offensive line. Joe Tooney came on board. Last year, they brought in Donovan Smith.
It's interesting hearing him talk about the Kansas City Chiefs and revamping their offensive line because that's exactly what they've done. The 49ers have had two chances to do such, where they lost two Super Bowls and they could have revamped the offensive line. They chose not to do it. Look at Pittsburgh, another really smart organization. I like to look at intelligent organizations and see what they do. And that's kind of how you gauge if your team is doing the right things. Now, the 49ers also have been a great organization, so I'm not acting as if they're not. But what are other smart organizations doing? Well, we know the Chiefs, obviously, they have Patrick Mahomes, though, so that's why they're winning Super Bowls. But you look at the New England Patriots, or excuse me, the Pittsburgh Steelers, they've really struggled, and they hadn't drafted the offensive line in a while. Well, last year, they went and got their left tackle. And then this year, they drafted presumably three more starters along that offensive line. The Detroit Lions, the rise of the Detroit Lions, you can put in conjunction with the rise of that offensive line. So these teams that are going to sustain success for a long-term period likely are going to do it behind a very good offensive line. And when you look at this is why I'm kind of bigger on Seattle than most people, because they did a really good job in getting their bookend tackles. Now they've got a center of the future who's going into year two. They just drafted arguably the best guard in this draft who's going to start right away. And then they went and got one veteran guard to play at their left guard position, but ultimately they're building through that offensive line. So the way that I see it is exactly the way Tom Brady sees it, which is if you want to compete long term, you've got to have a great offensive line. And I love how, in particular, he talks about the center position. The 49ers with Brindle, they're really behind the eight ball immediately, not having a great center. And then that parlays through the whole right side of the offensive line. Again, these are conversations we've been having, but hearing Tom Brady talk about how important it is, it's not surprising, but it's validating, I think, for most 49er fans that have been frustrated with the lack of focus on the offensive line that it seems like the 49ers are not putting into these NFL drafts. Let's continue.
Yep. And they really revamped that line. And look at the way Pacheco ran, even though he wasn't a high pick. Patrick could stand in there and make throws down the field. So they've got to continue to do that. All these teams need to make an investment in coaching the O-line and developing the O-line. And that's going to be the key to a lot of offensive success this year.
So Interesting. All of these teams need to invest in a good coach that coaches the offensive line and a good offensive line. Are your San Francisco 49ers doing that? And if they're not, how long can they sustain success? That is the question, because without a great offensive line, as he stated, you better have an all-star cast around this weak offensive line, which the 49ers have had. And that's why they've been able to stay afloat. Well, that seems to be coming to an end probably after this season. So is it easier to just build that offensive line through the draft and continue to hammer that home? Or is it easier to then revamp and get an all-star cast around your quarterback again? Protect Brock Purdy, get him the offensive line, do this the right way, build through the trenches, San Francisco. That is how you are going to have sustained success and give Brock Purdy the best chance that he has at reaching that elite level.